Hey, good evening. It's Tuesday, May 7th, and welcome back to Everyday Talk 24/7. We're going to be looking again at this new playlist of wisdom or tradition. The Old Testament Israelites, the Jewish leaders at the time of Christ, and many in the church today have been sucked into this vision of honoring tradition over wisdom. Just in case you might think that wisdom is somehow an Old Testament wisdom literature exclusive, listen to what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount as he concludes the sermon. Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man, who built his foundation, his house, on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because its foundation was on the rock. See, so much of our thinking today is if I do the right thing, if I honor God, everything is going to be okay. That's not what's said here. The wise person, the wise man, the wise woman, the wise child is going to face all the fierce storms of this life. The streams rising, the floodwaters, all of that. But they'll be able to withstand it. It's not a promise that they won't come, a promise that they'll be able to withstand it because their house is built on wisdom. And that wisdom is what Jesus is talking about in the wisdom literature and the Proverbs. But then notice this. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, just like in the wise person's house. And great was the fall of it. It fell with a great crash. What's the difference here? A foundation based on wisdom as opposed to a foundation based on tradition. See, what we get in trouble with this is that we don't put wisdom in the right place. Proverbs 4, which we've looked at extensively, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it costs you all you have, get understanding. And the NIV rendition here is really, I think, closest to the original. But be sold out for wisdom. What good is a beautiful house if it falls? That's the message of Jesus. And to repeat, wisdom is a skill, the skill of applying God's truth to life, internalizing God's word. Therefore, this is important, wisdom is more than simply memorizing commands and rules. Much more. It's not just memorizing commands and rules, it's knowing how they apply to life, which is what the wise man did, which is why his house stood, why the wise woman's house stood, why the wise teenager can stand. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, Proverbs 1 verse 7. That is the wise builder. But fools despise wisdom and discipline. That's the foolish builder. The people who opt for memorizing commands and rules instead of internalizing the truth, they're the foolish builders. Now, I'm going to give you an example. Therefore, tradition is not based on wisdom, but is the blueprint of the foolish builder. Wisdom is the blueprint of the wise builder because it's built on God's truth, the application of God's truth. And here's your example for tonight. Wisdom is the biblical direction of husbands. Tradition is the cultural direction of boyfriends. And you see, this is where we get tripped up. Just because there is not a biblical command that says, thou shalt not have a boyfriend, or that boyfriends are bad, we think it's okay to promote this boyfriend culture. But if we have the path of wisdom, we would see that the boyfriend culture is destroying our young women and our families. So just because there is not a direct command doesn't mean that wisdom doesn't apply. We've got to be engaged in this. Give me an example. Let's work through the boyfriend thing. There's no biblical foundation for it. There's no directive to have boyfriends. There's no lasting commitment. There's no acceptance of full responsibility. There's a limited ability to provide constant 24/7 emotional support and care. There's a limited ability to provide protection. There's a limited ability to provide financial support. There is no ability to provide shelter and housing in a biblical world. The possibility of future commitment to someone else is always there because it's not a permanent commitment. Sexual purity, therefore, is compromised. There is no public vow of devotion, and all of this equals a house that is built upon sand, because it's built on human tradition, and people go to great lengths to justify this method of understanding boyfriends. That's not what God has called us to. And the collapse of the house of the boyfriend model built on sand is great. And you know who it collapses on? It collapses on women, our young women. Even at the earliest ages, when they start thinking about relationships, they start thinking about boyfriends, 13, 14, 15 years old. And they're shattered by this model. But the biblical model, the wise model of husbands, and thinking about husbands and future husbands instead of boyfriends, is that the husband, the future husband, will accept the mantle of Christ to cover his wife. Mantle is a covering, a cloak. So he accepts that responsibility of Christ to cover and care for his wife. He commits to full responsibility for her, emotional, financial support. He commits to fully protect her. He commits to provide shelter for her. He vows publicly never to leave her. He wears a sign of his commitment to on his hand. Sexual purity is protected by this model. There is no trial period. The boyfriend thing is too much of a trial thing, but you don't do a trial with women's emotions or men with your emotions. This is the house built on a rock. This is the house that will last. Look around us. Everyone is acknowledging that our young people are an unstable mess. Suicide is on the rise. They're uncertain. And this is at least partly, not totally, but partly, because we have embraced the boyfriend model, which damages both young men and young women, which calls for no commitment on the part of men, except to try it out and see if I like her. And if I don't like her, if she doesn't meet my expectations, I'm out of here. But you see, as husbands, we are committed to loving our wives as Christ loved the church. There's no trial period. Help you get a quick idea of how damaging following cultural tradition is. But we've accepted it, and it's destroying our young people. The wisdom of looking for husbands will bring, again, security to our young people. There's obviously much more than this. I'm not saying this is the only thing, but this is a huge part of it. And it's a great example of when we accept traditional, cultural wisdom as opposed to the biblical model. Again, I'd love your thoughts and your feedback. We've got Q&A Friday coming up. Maybe you got some questions there. Thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor to be with you each day on Everyday Talk, 24/7. Lord willing, we'll see you.